Thank you for choosing this session. I know there was a lot of front-end things going on, but I'm glad to see you all made the right decision and came here. So this session is all about SVG and how to have fun making your site look hot. GitHub repo is down there. And to introduce myself, my name is Ryan Haggerty. I'm a front-end developer, and I work for a really awesome company called Chromatic. We do a lot of Drupal-related development. We also specialize in design and deployment. You can see us on chromaticscites.com. We're pretty serious about regularly pushing out Drupal blog posts. So we put a lot of good information out there, so you should totally check us out. We're a distributed company, so everyone works remotely. I'm in West Virginia, and we got people in New York, California, Colorado, all over the place. So you can follow me on the interwebs at Hot Pizzas. That's my Twitter and Drupal handle. And if you go to my Twitter page, I have a pinned tweet for the GitHub repo link, so you can go there and download the slides, follow along, do whatever you want. All right, so let's ask ourselves, what is SVG? And SVG stands for Scalable Vector Graphics. All right, what is it used for? All right, there's several different things you can use it for. You can use it for user interface icons, and remember that thumb shape. I'm going to reference it in a couple slides. You can use it for illustrations, patterns, background images, all sorts of really cool stuff. And right here is about the simplest SVG you could get. Okay, and for those familiar with SVG, there's going to be a lot of stuff at the beginning that's kind of introductory, but that's all right, because later we're going to do lots of cool stuff. And in this SVG tag is a rect tag, right? It stands for rectangle. And just a couple things you need to pay attention to. And that's the X and Y, width, height, fill, which is basically color. And boom, there you go. You got your first SVG shape. And there's several different shapes you could do. You could do circle, ellipse, line, polygon, and probably the one you're most going to run into is path. That's what's going to be like your custom shapes in Illustrator, all that stuff. Sounds easy, right? But if you remember that thumb icon from earlier, this is what it looks like in SVG. So lots of stuff going on, looks super intimidating, but trust me, it's really not. We're going to go through this, and this is going to look like nothing. I promise you. Stay with me. So don't panic. I got you covered. We're going to go through it.
Hey Ryan, you may need to speak up over there.
It just came on.
Okay. I will speak louder. So what makes SVG great? All right, there's several awesome things about SVG. First is scale. If you remember, and if you guys can't hear me, just holler again. I'm trying to speak louder. But first is scale. If you remember, the V in SVG stands for vector, right? And vector allows you to, since all the artwork is based on math, it allows you to scale infinitely, right? So you could take a 60-pixel thumb icon, that size, and put it on a giant 50-foot billboard, and it'll still look super clean, crisp, awesome. As opposed to a raster image, which, like a JPEG, right? You can only scale it up so far before it starts to look like garbage, and there's artifacts everywhere. And another thing that's awesome about SVG is it has super good browser support, right? So pretty much from this chart right here, you can see that it is supported in pretty much every browser except for IE8, surprise! And if you still have to support IE8, I'm sorry. I don't know why, but I'm sure there's a good reason. But don't worry. We're going to go over a way you can still use SVG with a fallback later slide, so I got you covered there. And just as a little aside, this is from a website called caniuse.com, and it's a really cool website that allows you to look up any kind of new feature in CSS and see how well supported it is for browsers, so you can make your decision on whether or not you want to implement it. All right, SVGs are resolution independent. Like I said with vector, super cool, right? Say if you have a high pixel density device, like a new iPhone, right? You have a JPEG, it could look like garbage. You could use the picture element and kind of scroll back through there, but you have to use a polyfill to get really good support across browsers, and if it doesn't have to be a JPEG, why bother with it? Just use SVG. You don't have to worry about it. It's already well supported. SVGs are super performing. They're really cheap for the browser to display, and almost always super small file size. You notice the asterisk? I'll give an example of one that is not small at all, kind of give you an idea of how to work with that. You can also deliver SVG via gzip back in the server. You can save another 20 to 80% of your file size delivering that way. So that's pretty cool. And you can do what you want with it, all right? You can change your SVG code. You can alter the color. You can change the shape. You can mask it. You can animate it. Unlike a JPEG, you could take a little part of your SVG and just affect that one part. SVG symbols are super awesome, right? You can reduce, reuse, and recycle. So it's pretty cool. Let me give you an example of this, right? So here's, these are two different code snippets. So here we have our SVG code, right? And up here, we have, basically, we're wrapping all of our path data in a symbol tag. And anytime you use a symbol tag, right, like it's not going to display the SVG. You're just kind of going to be able to use it for reference later. So down below, we have another SVG. And we're using the use tag, and we're referencing that hamburger symbol. And we defined our SVG data once, and then we can use it twice. We can use it 20 times if we want to. And this would be really awesome for like user interface icons, like say like you have social media buttons. It's got to be in your navigation, got to be in your footer, got to be in the sidebar, Somebody's really trying to get someone to share, which they never do. They never share your article, but this is a way to accomplish that very cheaply and very good. So what's the catch, right? This is web development. There's always a catch to kind of like give you a little headache. And the catch is that SVG is weird, right? SVG is super weird. There's all sorts of like tiny little issues that can kind of get in your way. The sizing coordinate system can be hard to understand. There's be half-pixel anti-aliasing. There can be strange height issues. And the view box can be a little bit, which I'll get to in a second, can be a little bit hard to understand. And there's even a GitHub repo dedicated just to the weird SVG issues that you can run into. It usually has to deal with IE9, but there's all sorts of strange things on there if you want to check that out. All right, so we kind of gone on why SVG is awesome. And now we're going to go kind of actually work with SVG, and we're going to export it from Illustrator. So here's where we actually start working with it, start having a little fun. There's a free alternative to Illustrator. If you're not into Adobe, I'm into Adobe, that's what I use. But if you don't want to pay, Inkscape, it's pretty popular online. A lot of people use it, but I use Illustrator, so that's what we're going to go with. Prep tips, all right. So if you notice here, in Illustrator, this is kind of like we have an X and Y coordinate and then our width or height. And this is kind of like selected around some art, okay? Our Y coordinate has 163.4 and our height has 260.8. Now this doesn't always happen, but sometimes when you're rendering or positioning your SVG element, you can get a half pixel on certain edges and it kind of like loses that super sharp crispness. If you take care of it ahead of time, you never have to worry about that happening across browsers. So as long as you kind of like keep it round, you'll be good. So just round down that Y, round up that height, and any kind of like distortion to your artwork will be so you won't even be able to perceive it. So just go ahead and do that. Crop to clipboard. All right. So we're still in Illustrator, and check this out. Imagine that's like my artboard, right? And then I have a little piece of artwork on there. This will be like our hamburger icon later. It doesn't look like much right now. It looks like some bookshelves, but we're going to work with it. And our artwork there is 250 pixels by 200, right? But if we export this entire thing from Illustrator, our artboard, which is our view box, which I'm going to explain here in a second, takes in all of those things. It takes in the artboard's width and height. It takes in the coordinate system of your artboard. So we want this to be super clean. And to kind of give you an example of a view box, right? Now this is where I'm going to talk about view box. So if it doesn't make sense, just ask me afterwards. If you can imagine like a building, SVG has its own coordinate system and the view box inside of it has another, right? So imagine a building and there's a couch inside like one of the rooms, right? The view box is the window. So you can move that couch around to another room and it still exists in that building, but you won't be able to see it. But if you move that couch into the window, into the view box, then you'll be able to see it. Does that make sense? Sweet, all right. So what we're going to do is we're going to select that art, and then we're going to like fit to selected art under Object Artboards. And then suddenly, awesome, our view box is super clean. 0, 0, 250, 200. Now this isn't a necessary step. You could still work with your SVG the other way, but this is another way just to save you some time, headache, and make your artwork super clean. Layer names are passed to your SVG from Illustrator, and this is pretty cool how Illustrator does this. So that hamburger icon I was working with, basically I got the layer palette, and I have like my one main shape, which is my layer name, hamburger, and then I have every single piece of art, every single shape I have named in here. And if you're not naming your layers in Illustrator or Photoshop, you should totally do that. It'll make everyone's lives super easier to ever come into contact with your work again. But another cool thing, besides just kind of organizing your artwork, is that when you save it, boom, like when it exports your SVG, it has hand bottom, hand mid right, hand mid left, already labeled so you can reference that if you want to animate it, if you want to change the fill color, all sorts of cool stuff. And if you actually want to get it out, just go File, Save As, File Format, SVG. Sweet. All right, and there's a couple options you need to pay attention to. First one is the image location. Now, I've never actually put in a JPEG inside of an SVG. I can't think of why you'd want to do that, but it might exist. But if you ever do, there's a couple options, embed or link. And embed will kind of just take your JPEG image and turn it into like a base 64, which kind of like makes it a little bit bigger file size. Or you could link it, and that'll just kind of like reference an external asset. And decimal places will determine the complexity of your path. So if you remember that like that beaker slide earlier of like 363.33348, super long decimal places. The shorter the decimal places, the lower the file size you'll have, but it also reduces the complexity of your path. And I've found that 1 is generally the best option you can get as far as staying true to your artwork, but also giving a really small file size. I've only run into a couple instances where I had to like bump up that decimal place to 2 or 3. All right, complexity of paths, all right. So if you remember that small file size asterisk from earlier, I actually ran into this one time. I had to use this. The person wanted to change the color of that on demand. But the problem is that this is a super complex path, right? I mean, like, there's tons of different paths. There's like tons of circles. Each one of those circles has like 20, 30 points on them, all stretched, splattered around. And if you look at the bottom, that is actually line 2038 of an SVG. And it's 233 kilobytes. So that is like way too big to be working with, right? Like if you have to work with an SVG that's that big, then you might want to re-question whether you want to work with it. Okay, so I promised this would be fun. I lied to trick you to get in here. No, but we're going to have some fun here in a second. We're going to be working with our SVG. We're going to be animating it, having some fun. So let's actually display our SVG. There's a lot of different ways to display your SVG. You could use the object tag. I wouldn't recommend this. It's kind of an outdated way, but this is what I was talking about. If you have to support Internet Explorer 8, this is a way to do that. And if the browser doesn't recognize SVG, it'll fall back to the image inside of it. So that's one cool way of supporting IE8 if you have to use it. You can embed, which don't, because it's kind of like a fallback to the way of using browser plugins. You can use it as an image. You can just like straight up drop it in as an image, which is cool. Or you could use it as a CSS background image. I like to use this for logos and stuff, things I don't really have to animate, because all of these methods I just showed you for displaying it, you can't actually alter like your SVG. You can't like animate individual parts or like change the fill color on the fly. The way you do that is through inlining, and that's because inlining is awesome. And what inline means is that you're just dropping your SVG code straight in there, right? And this way you can still manipulate the parts with CSS. You can apply filters, clips, masks. It's also one less request on the browser, so it's a little bit more performant. Inline can be not so awesome because if you have a really big SVG, it's difficult to cache. And I like to use the 4 kilobyte rule. And what that says is that there's diminishing returns on inlining versus caching. So like say if you have something bigger, it's actually more performant to just go ahead and drop that as an asset. So you can cache it rather than just kind of inlining it every time. But most of the stuff I work with, are UI icons, things like that, things I want to animate, and those are almost always under 4 kilobytes. If it's a little bit bigger, I wouldn't consider that, too big of a deal. All right, so check it out. That's what we exported from our Illustrator file. We have our SVG, and it's got all the awesome lines here with our layer names, all good to go. And so we're going to inline this because we want to animate all these individual parts. And that's what it looks like, our little desk drawer. All right, but we're going to make it a little bit cool. And we're going to animate it. All right, sweet. And there's several different ways you can animate it, right? The first is smile. If you ever wondered how to pronounce that, I did. In fact, for this speech, I specifically looked up how do you pronounce this. I thought it was called simul, but it's pronounced smile. And this actually animates inside of your SVG code. What we're doing right here is, from to duration 5 seconds, begin click. So when you click it, it's going to move to 250 over 5 seconds. But you shouldn't use it because it's been abandoned, pretty much. And in fact, actually, just within the last couple months, Google Chrome has begun giving it a console alert anytime someone's using SVG Smile, saying, hey, this is deprecated, you probably shouldn't use it. Chrome decided to go in favor of CSS, so Adobe was like, we're just not going to work on it anymore besides supporting it for the next release. You can use a JavaScript. You can animate via JavaScript. And Greensock is a JavaScript library. Despite concerns with JavaScript, Greensock is actually super performant. I don't have that much experience with it other than playing around with it, but it's pretty cool. You can chain animations. You can do all sorts of really sweet stuff with it. There's even a Draw SVG plugin, which costs money, which sucks, but it exists, and you can animate lines of SVG. And we're going to do that with CSS, so that'll be pretty cool. You don't even need it. And then finally, the way we're going to do it, CSS. All right. So what I'm doing here, now this is the world's simplest animation, but if you don't have experience with it, this will help. What I'm doing is I'm taking the ham top and ham bottom, the first and third line, and all I'm doing is on hover, just moving one up and one down. So let's go ahead and check that out. All right. Whoa, are you guys amazed? Okay. Oh no, it's going to get cool. We're going to build off of this to make this pretty sweet, right? And to kind of give you an idea, this is a little aside, but kind of give you a little tip. You notice what I'm doing here is I'm just using transforms to animate it. And I would totally, if you're going to animate something, I would suggest totally not using margins or padding or animating that way. Use transforms and opacity. It's really performant and doesn't cause the browser to have to repaint the entire window. And if you kind of check this out, I'll give an example of it. Under the Chrome DevTools, under rendering, I have enable paint flashing. So if you check it out, the only thing that turns green when I hover over it is those two things. So it's super performant, looks really good on desktop, mobile, even older mobile devices. All right. So the fun is intensifying. We're animating. All right. So how to animate the close button. All right, so all I'm doing here is I'm building off of what I did earlier, and I'm taking those two things, and when somebody clicks on it, I'm adding a class of open, and then I'm rotating it and just moving it, right? So I'm adding these two transforms together. Negative 135 degrees. And we're going to check that out. All right, cool. Sweet. So we kind of got it still doesn't look like a navigation icon yet. It kind of looks like this weird asterisk in prison. But we're going to make it look, we're building on it, and this looks pretty smooth. And it looks super smooth on mobile too, so transforms for the win. All right. Now here's when it gets super fun, all right? We're going to animate the line stroke. And this is when it gets really cool, right? CSS Tricks did this really cool write-up about a year ago. And let me just go ahead and show you real quick what it looks like. All right, sweet. So you notice all those bars are gone, right? And then what I'm doing here is cool, right? Yes. Okay, so yeah, that's pretty cool. And what I'm doing is I'm giving the illusion of animating those lines. I'm not actually moving those lines. What I'm doing is, you know, like when you're specifying like a border, right? You can choose like solid, dotted, dashed, or whatever. You know, there's like space in between dot or dash. You can use that in Illustrator too. What we're actually doing is we're animating that space, that gap in between the two lines. So I'm having a dashed line here, and I'm just pushing that gap around to give the illusion that the line is actually moving. So the line is always present. So I'm moving this is actually, the middle line is actually two lines, and I'm moving the gap on the left one to the left and up, and the right one to the right and down. So if we check it out in the code, all right, so I start off right here, right? Ham top box, ham bottom box. So I'm saying this dash offset and this dash array. So the dash array is 440 pixels, right? And that's actually the length of the entire line. That's why you don't see it. So, and then when I open it, what I'm doing is I'm actually animating where that gap goes. So I'm moving it negative 105 for the right one and 105 for the left one. So yeah, that's pretty cool. All right, SVG filters. Now this is kind of a really cool thing I don't think a lot of people have used yet. It allows you to like apply like Photoshop kind of like filters to your SVG work. You could apply it with CSS, but I wouldn't recommend it. It's kind of shorthand for actually just using it inside of your SVG. And the reason I wouldn't use it is because it has really poor support as of this moment, especially in Internet Explorer. It's not even like partially supported for Edge. So if you plan to support any type of IE, don't bother using it. I like using filters inside of your SVG. It has great browser support. You can combine filters for like really cool effects. And if you go to that link down there, you can see all sorts of the different SVG filters. All right, so what am I doing here, right? There's a lot of things going on here, but I'll explain it here in a second. And what I'm doing is I'm defining a filter, right? I'm giving it an ID. And right here, I have kind of like a couple different filters going on here. I have a Gaussian blur, and this standard deviation just kind of determines how like strong the blur is. And then in the result, there's a result tag. It's called blur1, and that's important. Pay attention to the result. And then in specular lighting, right? If you're familiar with 3D, I'm also giving a result of spec out, but I'm taking in blur1 from that Gaussian blur. So I'm taking in the filter from the Gaussian blur, and then I'm combining the two and sending it out as called spec out. I'm applying the lighting color, getting an exponent, which is how strong the light is, and I'm applying a point light to determine where that light is actually shining. And then that composite, I'm taking in the source graphic, right? Which is right here. All of my SVG data is actually grouped, and I'm referencing the filter, and I'm taking in spec out, which is taking in also Gaussian blur. Hopefully that made sense. And we're going to check this out. And you should never do this with a navigation icon because it looks like you're stuck in the 90s or whatever. Like some awesome 1997 Photoshop effect right here. Yeah, bevel that. All right. So yeah, I added some JavaScript mouse tracking code just to kind of like say like, hey, the location of that point light, just change wherever my mouse is. So we can click on it. Woo, yeah. And it's still kind of really performant, which is how awesome SVG is, right? I mean, like we got a lot of things going on here. We got transforms, animations, dynamic lighting going on, and we got this sweet bevel effect. I don't know. So yeah, cool for demonstration, but don't do that. And as a bonus, let me show you this other cool thing I did with filters. All right, this is pretty sweet. All right, I don't know how well you can see that. The quality's a little big when I zoom in here. All right, so this is actually, whoa. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually having, you can't really tell on the thing, but it's actually two images. I'm taking a really dark image of these rocks, and then I made like a bump map in Photoshop, a really super strong one, and kind of like really blown out the whites and darks, and then applied that SVG filter on top of it. So I have my dark image, my SVG filter, and then the really blown out light one on top of all those. And so now it kind of looks like, you know, like, hey, I'm stuck in this SVG dungeon. I don't know how to get out. So, I mean, filters are super cool, right? I mean, like, that's what I was talking about earlier. Like, it hasn't been used, thoroughly yet because it's kind of a strong tool. It's kind of a strong effect. But I think they're going to be really sweet here within a couple years. I think they're going to be used pretty thoroughly because you can do like all sorts of awesome stuff with it. We're still like making it a super performant site. All right. Now let's go into masks and clipping. All right, masks. Okay, so what we have here, it's very, very simple. All right, all I'm doing is masking an image. So I'm cutting out a part of it, and inside of my SVG, I'm just defining a mask, giving the mask tag, and giving it an ID of whatever I want to call it. I'm calling it mask. And I'm defining my shape, right? It's a simple ellipse shape, simply defined. And then in the image tag, hey, reference this image, and mask equals the ID of mask I was applying. So let's check it out. Let me zoom out again. All right, and that's all it is. It takes the Drupal Camp Atlanta logo and makes it sad. So that's what masks do. Got a sad Drupal face here. And you can apply, this is a very basic example, but you could apply masks several times to your SVG and images. You could use several different shapes. So you can make kind of like really cool complex paths with this. All right. Now let's talk about clipping. All right, cool. You can define it via your CSS. I don't like to, not very well supported. So I just go ahead and put it in my SVG, inline it. All right. So it's similar to masks in that like there's a couple different caveats going on here, right? You define it with a clip path, okay? ID of clipping, and then in my CSS, WebKit path, defining with the ID of clipping. And then I'm giving it its own like width and height, its background color, all that stuff. And then inside of the clip path, I define in my shape as a circle. And we'll get back to the clip path units here in a second because that's pretty important. So clipping. Goodbye, sad Drupal. All right. So I don't know if you guys are able to see it, but it's actually like a circle that expands and doesn't go past the box there. So, whoop. All right, cool. A lot of stuff going on here, but it's still super fast as far as animating goes. Let's actually check out the paint layers real quick. All right, get out of here. Okay. Not bad, right? Cool. All right, so remember I was talking about clip path units there in a second? All right, beware the coordinate system. With clip path units, right here, there's two options, okay? And this is just kind of like a caveat. If you ever use clipping, this is something you should know because it can cause you a really big headache if you don't know what's going on here. With clip path units, there's two options. The default is user space on use. That's always the default. And if you define it, the alternative is object bounding box, okay? So what user space on use does is that it actually takes the coordinate system of whatever is next above it, which is usually the window. So it'll actually take your entire clipping path and move it out of your document flow. So it's kind of like if it makes sense, kind of like absolute positioned. But if you define object bounding box, it'll inherit the SVG that you're working on. There's ways around that. User space on use, you can nest SVGs. You could have that SVG wrapped in an SVG, and that's the next thing it'll take for object bounding box. But if you want it in the flow of your document to use that clip path, use object bounding box. And the caveat with that is, I don't know why the W3 did this. I'm sure they had a really good reason. But if you use object bounding box, any shape must be defined in a 0 to 1 range. So if you remember that that path data from the thumb icon earlier, how it had like 383.3, like 424.6, like how do you convert all that down to 0 to 1 range? Well, there's a couple ways you could do that. I spent like one afternoon like being like, how do I do this? But if you actually apply like a CSS transform scale to whatever your biggest number is, like say it's like 14 or whatever, and you put a scale of 0.01 or 0.001 or whatever, then as long as it's within that 0 to 1 range, then it'll inherit that object bounding box, be all good, display, and stay within your document flow. So it sounds complicated, but once you start using it, I promise it'll be super second nature. All right, guys, so thank you for coming to my session on SVG. Follow me on Twitter, Hot Pizzas, Chromatic Sites, a lot of Drupal design and related awesomeness there. And I'll open it up to any questions you guys have. Thank you.
All right, got a question.
Sure.
I think a lot of us in here, I'm guessing, have seen SVGs and understand what they are. Can you share some real world scenarios that you've created SVGs for? Like this example was a good one for like a menu icon, but can you share like real world examples where you've used it?
Yeah. Let me think here.
And not to put you on the spot, but we're just trying to, we get the technology, but we're trying to understand how or where we use it.
Yeah, my opinion was this, unless it has to be a JPEG, like it's a picture of people or whatever, use an SVG. Because the benefits are way better. Smaller file size, more performant, looks good on all devices, you don't have to worry about it.
So get rid of PNGs altogether.
Unless it has to be. I think I shut down my system. I think it's live, actually. Hold on. All right, I'll go show you this. I didn't design this, but basically this is like an option where I used SVG. And I used a jQuery library called Waypoints. They wanted it to animate as you scroll down. So as your mouse goes over there, things scroll down. So those are examples of SVGs I used like out in the wild. It's all free, yay! Hope they don't mind me showing this, but yeah, that's an example of something I used in the wild. Yeah.
And one example I used recently was to use an SVG for a scalable diacritics over characters. So, and the feature request, of course, was a diacritic over 2 letters to represent the sound that you're pronouncing of, let's say, like a long O sound or a short O sound. So a brev or whatever over 2 characters. And obviously, that's not possible with a Unicode text. So with SVG and pathing, and so that it could be, you could scale it with the other text that would be right next to it. It still looks a little janky, but it's the only real possibility.
Yeah, and like you can define text in your SVG. There's a text tag, so you can put text right inside of your SVG and kind of like animate that way. Yep.
On the spot here, what's Google's support for SVG tags?
Okay, for accessibility, or you mean for like accessibility?
Sure, accessibility, or if I'm searching for something that's only to be found in my image, that could be another reason to go SVG, because honestly, if you have a PNG that's smaller and it has text in it,
yeah,
you're better off with SEO to have it in.
Yep. And there's also there's greater accessibility where you can define just for like screen readers. If you're worried about that, you can find titles so you describe your SVG. And there's also a description tag. I think it's DSC to kind of give it a little bit more of a description tag. So that helps with accessibility. Yep.
I've had some issues with text actually resizing the same way as the graphic background inside of SVG. Is that something you've come across before?
That's not something I've come across.
Okay.
Sorry. Yep.
Have you run into limitations with SVG to make you want to use most of the SVG elements for the project, but you have to also mix in other things?
Unless it's like an image of like a person. I mean, if it's a super complex path, like in an example I gave you, I ended up using a JPEG that called different images just because it was way too big. As far as limitations, like advantages versus photos, no, not really. Yeah.
For the beaker image that you put up on the screen, would you be able to like go over some like that long string numbers to help like digest?
Yeah, absolutely.
the coordinates that are there. That's, I mean,
Yeah,
it
no
is
problem.
like a beaker image, like, right? So how can I not scream, when I read that?
Okay, so this is an example of what Illustrator will spit out when you're exporting it, right? I mean, it's a little bit cleaner now. This is Illustrator 19. I grabbed this from the web. So it's defining its version. 2.0 is just getting proposed, and there's lots of cool things happening with SVG 2.0. I don't know if it'll make it through, but I think you can even be able to change a fill color with a referenced image, like a CSS background image, which would be super awesome. ID, which is that layer, gives a description. All of this, all of this junk up here, it's not super necessary. SVG includes it. And okay, this is really funny. Enable background, that actually had some history, but Adobe ruined it by including it in every export. It was going to be able to control backgrounds, but now W3 has decided Adobe has ruined this. Every SVG on the internet now has this because everyone's using Illustrator. So it means nothing. It means deprecated. You can strip it out and not pay attention to it. For the path data, style, fill, just changing the fill color. And for the path data, I don't know really what to tell you right here. There's lots of things going on. I know that you can free draw like complex Bezier curves through this, but M94.812, I'm assuming that's just like an element of space and stuff like that. Is there anything specific about it that?
Yeah, I mean, what exactly does M mean here, or C?
I think C is curve, lowercase c is curve. Yes, I'm Googling an answer into my session. Yeah, there you go. She got it. Beat me to it.
Like if format of, if I was to write this by hand, she'd probably think I'm crazy, but so move to would take the so what you're saying is they have it's like a function and then that takes
say like you have a point, right? And then like you have another point in space, move to that point. All right, so you're kind of like just drawing your line right there. So and then if you have a curve, then you have like your Bezier curve over there.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
On your dungeon effect that you had,
Sure.
how would you go about assigning clickable areas inside of that? Would that be like just a click map or?
No, I mean, like, can you give me an example? Or
I mean,
what are you imagining?
Let's say it's something where you're hunting for the treasure.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and you got a treasure and you can click on it and it use it to the next page or the next.
Honestly, the way I would do it would be kind of just overlay an absolutely positioned element of like a div tag and stuff and use it that way, and kind of click it that way.
JavaScript might be able to react on the event inside the SVG.
Yeah. I mean, the mouse pointer thing's reacting to the effect of the SVG filter, so that's pretty cool. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, some of the animations that you were showing us some examples with the mouse over, would that behave differently than I guess like a touch screen? Or would it be?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, right now, I only made this presentation for desktop, so right now it's only on click as far as JavaScript goes. I'm sure you could have like jQuery, touch, that type of thing if you wanted to animate that. Yeah.
You showed exporting from Illustrator out to SVG. Is there any way to do it the other way, to bring SVG data into Illustrator and get all your Bezier curves back?
Yeah, I mean, all you have to do is just open an SVG in Illustrator.
I tried that in the past and it didn't work.
Really?
Yes.
I
tried it in the past year or two.
Yeah, I do it all the time. You mean like just kind of like all your path data? They might have like removed. They might have removed like kind of like keep it editable. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
That is something to think about for clients too. If you put your logo in an SVG file, you're literally giving a resolution-independent version that they can open up in Illustrator and
that's
put
true.
anywhere. That could be good. Could be bad.
Said I've started to see places
the logo's coming from whoever's developing the logo standard in SVG, so then you can just drop it in, and it preserves aspect ratios and colors and whatnot smoothly.
All right, cool, guys. Unless there's any other questions. Nope. All right.
It'll probably be on the Google Camp site, but I really enjoyed your presentation. Got a lot out of it. We have access to any of your code snippets or these slides.
Yep. If you go to my Twitter account, Twitter/hotpizzas, you should follow me. I have lots of Twitter fun together. I have a pinned tweet with my GitHub repo, has all the code, all the samples, and a folder for all the slides. Yeah.
Only 75 tweets.
I tweet rarely.
Therefore, it's important to listen.
Yeah, I know, right? I definitely do not tweet pictures of my lunch, so you don't have to worry about that. All right, guys, thank you a lot for coming.